This is a HeadGum podcast.
Hello, this is Fake the Nation, where we talk about news, we talk about politics, and where we count down the days till this election is over because, my God, no one wants the stress anymore. I am your host, Negin Farsad, and I'm solidly brewing in my bespoke mix of extreme optimism and fatigue because no one said optimists didn't need a nap. Today, we'll talk about the state of the race, a little issue with the North Carolina governor's race, and a fresh batch of election rules. We'll also talk about a new trend where young men are going to church, but young women are not. And finally, is the customized drink out of control? All right, you guys, today's panel is it's like a high-class elite panel, okay? It's just among the things we do here at Fake the Nation is we gather the very best. We have joining us, he's an artist, he's an activist, he's also a New York Times bestseller, no big deal, and he's also the co-creator of the 1/6 comic book series. I've known him for years. He's so incredible, so prolific, so funny, and so interesting. It is the one and only Golan. Hey, Gon.
Hey, great to be here, and thanks for the boost in self-esteem. We should hang out more often, Negin.
Well, here's another man whose self-esteem I'd like to boost if it isn't already there, because he's so great. He's a professor of practice at law at Harvard Law School. I met him when he was doing a million other things in the world of social justice. He's also co-author of the 1/6 comic book series, and just has done so much for the world you don't even know. He is the one and only Alan Jenkins. Hey, Alan.
Hey, thanks for having us on. I feel like there's a lot of pressure.
All right. Well, before we get into the show, I just want to remind listeners that you can still buy your We're Only Doing Optimism t-shirts at NeginFarsad.com, and you can support the show by going to patreon.com/NeginFarsad. This week, we actually released a bonus where Marcela Arguello and Christine Conger joined me to talk about the orgasm gap between men and women. And guys, I've never blushed so hard. Turns out I have a hard time talking about sex, even in purely sociological terms. And Marcella and Kristen really enjoyed watching me squirm. So go to patreon.com/NeginFarsad to get these crazy bonuses and to support the show. Any of these measures help keep the lights on here at Fake the Nation. So I really, really appreciate it. Now let's get into it with topic number one. Okay, so first, this is a politics segment, and I want to talk about where you guys are on the freak out scale. There was a poll that came out earlier this week that showed Trump leading in the Sunbelt battleground states, but Kamala had the lead in the other polls. Whatever, the polls are going back and forth, but now people are actually learning a little bit more about Kamala, right? So she's kind of not only the underdog in the race, but the lesser known person. We read a piece in the Washington Post that claimed we shouldn't be freaking out because, quote, maybe she's less like Obama than she is like Clinton, with a more affable public persona and without all the scandal and entitlement. This time, that might just be enough. Alan, is that enough?
Yeah, so I'm definitely freaking out. But honestly, I'm happy to be freaking out. You know, if you talked to me 2.5, 3 months ago, it was just a grim death march to the end of our democracy. And so now I'm freaking out quietly on the inside. I think it's very close. I actually think that despite the small edge that the public poll is giving Kamala, I actually think Trump is in the lead in terms of electoral college and reality. And I'm freaked out about that. But I think, we've got hope and possibility, and there's still several weeks to go. So I'm happy to be freaked out right now.
Great answer for the optimist among us. Although I do want the poll quote not to be Trump is in the lead in the electoral college in reality. What was it? In numbers and in reality, or something like that. Okay, but I hear you. That's exactly how I feel. I've been saying, that I feel really energized, really optimistic, really excited. and at the same time, like just really terrified, so like a lot like skydiving. And so that's where my personal heart has been. Gan, where are you at?
I'm in the slowly renewing my passport phase of freak out. It was a lot more urgent a couple of months ago, but yeah, I think it's really important not to be overconfident right now. There are hidden factors within the polling and the electorate that we always have to be mindful about. Obama was very clear about this when he was running. I remember his team saying we need a +5 margin just to account for the racism that is lurking out there in the electorate. And there's two additional hurdles that Harris needs to overcome, being both a woman and a woman of color. And so the margin, even when she is ahead, is not nearly far enough to make me feel comfortable. But there is a lot that we could be doing, and there's a lot that she could be doing, and her campaign could be doing within the time remaining. She's explosively has minimized Trump's advantage, and it's been amazing to watch. At the same time, everyone wants to hear those concrete policies that could actually, say, no, this is absolutely the better bet. It's not just about personality and character. And once again, we're seeing the Democrats very skittish about running on traditional Democratic progressive policies that are overwhelmingly popular with the electorate. And so she has an opportunity to come out and really explicitly say, this is what I'm going to deliver and fight for working people in this country. And it's a long list of very popular policies: increased minimum wage, even popular with a small but significant amount of Republicans, higher taxes on the ultra wealthy, expanding, not cutting, Social Security, paid maternity leave, government funding for healthcare, boosting the minimum wage, tuition-free in state public colleges actually polls very popular, even Medicare for all. And so things like this are just sitting out there waiting for them to become campaign issues, and they're winning issues. So we hope that she's willing to step into the ring on the policy front more strongly. And at the same time, we all have work to do no matter what. We have to protect democracy and stop fascism. And so that means doing our part in hitting the streets, knocking doors, sending those postcards, making those calls, putting out a graphic novel if that's helpful. But we are not far enough ahead to ensure that our democracy and basic rights will be protected. So no time to be complacent right now.
Absolutely. And I was doing a show, a Kamala Harris fundraiser last night with the comedians Gary Gulman and Todd Berry and Christian Finnegan. And, and I was saying to them, I feel like my part-time job right now is literally just doing Kamala Harris fundraisers where they're like, we need 3 comedians to like entertain these people. And so they'll give us money. You know what I mean? And I feel like, yeah. And I'm just saying all I'm doing now is that, and making, stuff. We're actually videos coming out with MoveOn.org very soon. So you'll see some of the other stuff I've been doing when it comes to turnout, which I think is like the big game right now is turnout. There's also the policy question. And I think it's interesting, you mentioned a lot of policies that like seem really attractive for sort of like working families. I heard like an interview in the New York Times on a New York Times podcast where like these undecided voters, which, so strangely still exist, agree that Trump is like a crazy mad person, whatever, but that what they didn't hear Kamala talk about, they heard her talk about like a credit for buying your first house. They heard her talk about, childcare costs. They heard her talk about a credit for having a newborn. But what they didn't hear her talk about is something that would address people over 65 that have none, that for whom all of that phase of life is over. And I was like, oh yeah, plus they're the ones most likely to vote, right?
Mm.
So let's get some of those senior citizen focused policies out there if anyone is listening. Okay, the other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is there's been just a lot of election site ramp up business. Okay, so I'm going to tell you guys about some of them. I want you guys to react. The state of Georgia is now requiring a hand recount of the number of votes, not how each vote was cast, but the total number to see if that matches the total number on the machines. So that's something. Other election officials are introducing radical transparency measures to kind of get ahead of the election skepticism that I think we're all expecting. Some are hosting open houses so that the skeptics can see the process. Some are installing cameras at ballot drop boxes, which is actually was one of the central claims in the 2020 election lie, was that mules were stuffing those boxes. Anyways, that didn't happen. But to get ahead of that, they're installing cameras. And in Arizona, they're allowing the public to attend training sessions that were once only open to bipartisan election judges. So there's all sorts of measures. So the one in Georgia's gotten a lot of attention. It's a bit controversial. What do you make of these moves in these battleground states?
Well, the first one that you mentioned, Negin, the Georgia change to, hand counted ballots, it's going to lead to delay and chaos, and that's its intention. And it opens the process up to, to mischief and contestation in what everyone knows is going to be extremely tight election. So it's a big problem. And I actually still hope that it can be overturned, because all of the election officials in Georgia were against it, people who are actually implementing on the ground, the attorney general, the secretary of state, the governor, against it. So I hope that's going to get overturned. We'll see. But on the more positive side, trying to stay with the optimism theme, transparency in our democracy, true transparency, like this is how the system works. Here's how you can observe the things that are not, don't need to be private for people's privacy and to protect them from intimidation. That's a good thing. Right? We should all understand how our democratic systems and mechanisms work. That's what gives people more confidence. It also is what, allows us to scrutinize real threats and problems in the system, as opposed to, myths and lies. But we also have to recognize there are going to be myths and lies, because those have nothing to do with actual suspicion. They have everything to do with undermining our democratic institutions. So, yes on transparency, no on the Georgia system of hand counting, which all the experts agree, is going to introduce more error and more chaos.
Yeah, because apparently one of the things about the hand counting is that sometimes people will take the ballot, fill it out in one of those cubbies, and then forget to put it in the machine. So then there'll be a natural discrepancy just because people mess up and walk out with the ballot or whatever. Which I actually one time almost walked out with the ballot because I was I filled it out, let's go. Forgetting that the critical part is to put it in the machine. And so sometimes those discrepancies, the discrepancies do exist, will exist. And so I just I worry that a big deal is going to be made for what are natural discrepancies in human error in coming in and out of the voting booth. And it's 3 people have to agree about the numbers in Georgia for each election site to be able to go forward. And that's a lot. I don't know if you've ever done that, but I regularly have to tally expenses for gigs that I do. And I usually have to end up having to tally it 2 or 3 times because I don't get the same number. And so I'm just me versus me can't get the same number. Never mind me and 2 other people counting pieces of paper. And the other thing, God, I wanted to ask you about this is that I think it was 3 out of the 5 people who voted for this. So 3 for, 2 against voted for this measure. Those 3 people who voted for it are Trump supporters, and one of them actually showed up at a rally. Does that, are you what are your feelings about election officials being kind of nakedly partisan in that way?
Well, it's particularly troubling. It's not just about partisanship. It's about this particular political movement, which has been all about denying election results. Literally attacked the Capitol violently over their denial of election results. So that's a very huge red flag. And, everyone is in favor of greater transparency, more legitimate ways to legitimate voting rolls, et cetera. But what we're seeing is a lot of these measures are actually voter suppression in disguise. There's a long, proud history of that happening in the United States, all the way back to Jim Crow laws. And we see this happening again, particularly targeting communities that they know may lean in the opposite direction. And so that's really troubling. I'm always wondering, what red state is going to win it this year for voter suppression? I'm biased towards Texas. I have family there, but it's kind of incredible to see so many of these measures, which actually, overwhelmingly reduce the amount of legitimate voters from having their voice, and reducing that. We saw this in Texas, the last election, like massively reducing the amount of actual places you could deposit, or polling places or places you could deposit your ballots. And that was overwhelmingly in Black and Latino communities. So these things are not being applied across the board. We understand what the intention is. And it comes down to the fact that the GOP understands its position in this moment is that it is a minority party. The minority they're trying to protect most are white male middle-aged voters, and they want to make sure that they have a disproportionate unfair impact on the election outcome. So we're seeing a lot of these maneuvers that are not in good faith. It's very concerning. And again, we should be expanding the right to vote and not limiting it, and understanding that it's still a majority rules country, but we're seeing all of these mechanisms that are allowing minority rule, from the Electoral College on down to gerrymandering districts, and ultimately to these voter suppression measures.
Which is just another reminder that we got to keep working. It's fine. No one said it was going to be easy.
You can't, it's not just about 50.01% here. There needs to be much larger.
It has to be a larger margin. Larger margin, title of this episode. Okay, well, let's just quickly talk about this one dude. Mark Robinson is the GOP candidate running for governor in North Carolina. And boy, did he get himself into a pickle. And it recently came out that in the past he posted on a porn site that he is a Black Nazi, plus some other salacious stuff. The Black Nazi thing feels pretty unforgivable to me. But considering how Trump, has also been convicted of sexual assault by a civil court and has played footsie with neo-Nazis, I wonder how is this any different for someone that's down ballot? It's like Mark Robinson's like, well, yes, but also Trump. He hasn't. That is not his position. His position is, I never did any of those things, although they keep finding evidence that he did. So, but for a voter's mind, if we cross the Rubicon so much that like a Mark Robinson could squeak through with this recent scandal.
Well, I think he could sneak through, in part because we have such a polarized electorate that people vote the party line, and in his state, the Republican Party has predominated. But I think it's also true. Here's the optimistic part: there are, or at least the mixed part, Trump has proven himself to be uniquely able to get away with these outrages and atrocities, and others, including lots of the candidates he's endorsed, who've subsequently been shown to have serious problems, have been derailed for them, and actually it can affect up and down the ballot. I don't know what's going to happen in North Carolina. Almost every part, the sentence, right? He posted on a porn site that he was a Black Nazi, among other things, and that slavery should be reinstituted, and he would like to own slaves.
Fun one,
and again, he's denied that this happened. Like the fact that every word in that sentence is enough to make your head explode. And the reason that Trump has tried to lift up these Black ultra conservative Republicans to do his bidding is because he's trying to send a message to a particular segment of Black men. I think the fact that the people he's picked are so deeply, deeply flawed, it is problematic for him, and I think is going to peel away some of the folks who might otherwise buy into it. But, we'll see.
Well, the other fun fact is that he was already running behind the Democratic candidate, so that's cool. Like in the polling, beyond the margin of error. And another fun fact is that Vance was asked about their position, the Trump campaign's position on Mark Robinson, and he said that, quote, the allegations aren't necessarily reality, so they're just not backing down, but they're not, they're doing that wiggly thing of they can't admit that they're riding the wrong horse. All right, folks, let me know, what do you think? I will take a quick break right now to hear from our sponsors, and when we get back, the show shall continue. And we are back, and we're ready for topic number 2. Apparently, there's a new trend. For the first time in American history, young men are more religious than young women. They're more likely to identify as religious, and anecdotally, they're just filling up more of the pews in churches throughout the country. Gon, were you surprised to hear about this?
Not really, actually. I grew up in a very progressive church, but we have seen religion drifting in the United States become far more politicized, far more captured. Not overall, let's say not totally, but the influence of conservative reactionary politics on American churches. Unsurprisingly, has turned off a lot of people from attending church. And, but this statistic was interesting, that there's such a distinct split between men and women and attending church, where you always used to think of churches as family time, and now it's going to become bro time. And that's kind of wild. And it made me think, churches, maybe they'll become like the new Tinder, where people go looking for dates only to find out it's mostly dudes who are there. And if that percentage gets any higher, maybe it'll be the new Grinder. But it's not surprising that women are leaving, because many churches have become explicitly aligned with ultra conservative politics that see women as second-class citizens, both limited chances for advancement within the church in terms of leadership, but also espousing policies from the pulpit that increasingly restrict women's rights. And so it's not surprising, but there still are progressive churches out there. There's still a lot of churches that haven't really fallen in line with this, and so there's an opportunity there to create, I think, healthy places where, different models of masculinity are being uplifted, and, the basic narrative that one often hears in more conservative churches of, fear rather than love and welcoming the stranger as Jesus commanded, or, really a lot of systems of domination and hierarchy being sort of the mode, as opposed to envisioning a society of equality and justice. Like, I think it has a lot to do with the infiltration of a lot of politics into a space that people normally came to for community,
spirituality. Yeah. And I think that leadership point is really good, because if you've been told for decades, you're a lady, you've been told for decades that you cannot rise in the ranks to leadership positions, throw in an overturning of Roe v. Wade. And if you're a Gen Z lady, you'll be like, why would I do this? Why would I stay here? You know what I mean? It just sort of stands to reason that you wouldn't. And according to the numbers, among Gen Z, almost 40% of women now describe themselves as religiously unaffiliated, compared to only 34% of men. And in every other age group, men are more likely to be affiliated. So this is really like a generational gap that we're seeing. And here's the other interesting thing is the men are less educated than their female peers. In major cities, including New York and DC, they earn less. And a lot of the men that they're attracting place a higher value on traditional family life. Now, I'll editorialize there and say it's because traditional family life puts men at the head of the family instead of at the co-equal head of the family alongside a woman in a heterosexual, traditional marriage. So I think those things are all like off-putting. So I don't know. Alan, what do you make of this trend?
Yeah, a few things. Part of the detail in that study, or at least in the article describing it, is that women of that same generation less likely to be religiously affiliated in the formal sense, but higher levels than men of spirituality, of their relationship to God, is the way it's described in the
Hmm.
piece. And so question, are Gen Z men more religious, or are they just more wedded to the institutions of the church and synagogue and mosque and other places? And for all the reasons that Gan describes, you can see why young women might want to make that break. They still value their relationship with God. They still are engaged in spirituality, actually at a higher level than their male peers, but they're not necessarily going to go and literally be preached at by a bunch of dudes. Their tolerance for that is, and probably healthily, lower than previous generations. One of the things we also see, as Gan noted, is that progressive religious institutions are actually shrinking in terms of their numbers. There's a rise in the white evangelical church. A lot of those folks were, egging on participants in the January 6th insurrection. There's a whole kind of ideology around Trump as selected by God, as well as men ordained as the
Yeah.
head of families and institutions. And so,
Yes.
yeah, not that surprising, perhaps, that younger women in particular are not finding that appealing.
And the other thing is, like, when I first read this piece, my initial instinct, and I don't know if this is not charitable or what, but I just thought, well, I felt sorry for dudes, because my feeling was, if sports are not an option for a particular dude, then it's either be religious or be an incel, and for some, and again, like, maybe, and I'm like talking to two dudes, so you could push back, but that
There's
was
also
like,
comic books. Don't forget about that.
That's right.
Some of my best
That's right.
friends, yeah.
Yeah, you guys are very archetypal dude right now with the comic book world. But I just feel like it, for some reason, there doesn't seem to be like a gathering space for men that is not promoting this kind of like men should be the head of everything, like, ideology. And I feel like that's something that's really lacking. When I was looking at some of the pictures of the men in pews, I was like, oh, well, maybe they should just join a fraternity and like put their time into public service and like go clean up a park or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, what's missing in the world of male communal settings, that, and for some reason it's just easier for women to do that, and they don't necessarily need a church to kind of feel the community. So I don't know, I feel a little I feel a little sorry for dudes, because I do see that it might be harder. I mean, God, is that fair?
I think you're onto something here, which is, if they're, I think, not to generalize for everybody, but, but men have, seen their position in society changing and being renegotiated in a lot of ways that are very good for everyone, in fact, and for men specifically. But there's the question of like, how do we inhabit roles in our community, in our family, in our society that feel positive, but aren't wrapped up in all of these older models that have been very harmful and toxic at times to other people. And so there's a gap right now, and there's a lot of work that I think men have to do in terms of creating these communal spaces that aren't founded on some really backwards and harmful ideas, and allow us to show up in all the great ways that people in our lives need us to and want us to. And but if there's a gap, someone is going to fill it. And so that is where I think the GOP has been so successful on multiple fronts, as we've seen society evolving and changing. there's a lot of gaps. Men are feeling more economically insecure than ever, as women have really come forward in the workforce, as the nature of work has changed. And then there's real wages have gone down certainly in traditionally male dominated fields.
Yeah.
And so men, rather than understanding that there's economic forces at work, CEOs are making more than ever before in history, while the average working class wages have gone down. Inequality is at an all-time high. Rather than seeing those larger systemic structural decisions, really, as the source of so much of their insecurity, that is, of course, being directed towards women, towards other men, towards immigrants, towards everyone else. But we have a lot of work to do, both on the cultural level, creating spaces for men, but also going back to the bread and butter issues that gave everyone else a sense of security economically in this country.
Oh my God, I'm hearing a sound.
Me too.
Okay, something popped up. Sorry. I don't know what that was. Okay. Yes. Okay. Well, folks, tell me, are you seeing this trend in a church that you go to? I'm so curious to hear. By the way, this piece that we referred to throughout was written by Ruth Graham for the New York Times. And now is as good a time as any to announce that I'm introducing a free tier on Patreon. So for free, you'll get a monthly newsletter with some of the better pieces we've read, because, over the years, I get this question a lot, like, where did you read that? What's the link? You know what I mean? And I try and credit while we're doing the story, but I could see that having it all in one place could kind of be much easier. If you're interested in reading these awesome pieces that we read to prepare for the show, join on Patreon for free. You'll subscribe, and then once a month I'll send out this newsletter with some of the highlights of the better reading that we've done, and I'll be introducing that first newsletter in a couple of weeks, so sign up now, guys. All right, let's move on to topic number 3. All right, we're going to dip into culture with 2 items here. I want to first talk about, this is stupid, but the customized drink order. Now, I'm not talking about cocktails. I'm talking about the insane world of things we can drink, from coffee variations to boba and matcha and sodas. And now you can get all of these things with an infinite variety of add-ons that create like an astounding number of incalculable combinations. As a former barista, I get heart palpitations thinking about this. I get heart palpitations when I go to a Starbucks and I hear someone's order that is insane. A TikTok influencer is quoted in a piece that we read saying, quote, "People are able to carry it around and show people, this is me." That was his defense of the insanely customized drink order. My question is, do you feel personally like you're expressing yourself through these drink orders? And do you have one? Do you engage? Alan, do you engage in the complicated drink order?
Yeah, not really. I'm one of those people who regularly drinks like black instant coffee, much to the horror of everyone around me. But I've seen
that did send shivers down my spine. I just want to be clear.
Yeah, it's a little revelatory of me, unfortunately. But I have encountered the machines occasionally. I like the Dr. Pepper. Okay, but I feel like there should be a button that's just like, take me directly to the hospital for type 2 diabetes treatment, because that's the overwhelming thing. It's just like there's so much sugar, and as my wife keeps telling me, sugar is poison. So yeah, I'm not really a partaker of those all those options.
God, what do you think?
I think anything we can do as a society to more closely align our personal identity with with an endless amount of products is definitely what we should be aiming for. And add on top of that endless infinite choice. There's nothing that creates a greater sense of agency among people than being confronted by a set of choices that mean nothing but never stop. So I think it's going to create greater paralysis and alienation among people. This is not new. This is what advertising has been doing for a long time. but yeah, I think it underscores some basic, deeper structural things again that we're not really addressing, which is sugar is a drug. It's there's a massive industry behind it, and it is just being given to us in every form imaginable, and it's killing us. But so I don't know what we do about that, but I think we should start thinking about it in those terms.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I just want to say, okay, so
Sorry, go ahead.
there's part of it that feels very American, right? Like the customer's always right. Whatever ridiculous combination of things you want, you will get. This is America, you know? And by the way, as an American who's traveled extensively and I go to like, let's say a France that I love, I've asked for like some ice and they look at me and I know that ice is frowned upon in like most of the world, which is like one of the things that the world has wrong and America has right, because ice on a summer's day, get the fuck out of here. It's like the best. So I understand that Americans can be like a bit too much with what we expect, but I have a theory, not backed up at all by anything we've read, that is that boba, I feel like, exacerbated this. Like boba came on the scene, I don't know, like 10 years ago, and like I feel like that has made everything crazier. And boba is from Taiwan. So we can't just say this is like Americans being nuts, because it's also the Taiwanese being nuts. And when boba came onto the scene, and it was just, the whole thing with boba is like all the different options, right? I feel like then coffee and everything else kind of like reacted to that and became more insane. So it's I feel like it's even a global problem. My theory is it was we already had too many coffee choices, but I think exacerbated by boba. That's my theory. Alan, what were you going to say?
Well, first of all, I'm Team Boba, and I'm Team Ice. To be clear, but so I don't know. I'm not ready to blame Boba for the high caffeine and sugar rate. But in the recent article about this, they mentioned, just like as an offhanded comment, oh, and Panera discontinued one of their lemonades because it was named in two wrongful death lawsuits. I feel like
Yeah,
that was
that's
kind of
horrible.
burying the lead a
Yeah,
little, right?
yeah.
So I don't know. We'll let the legal process play itself out, but I think we deserve our share of the blame on that. I don't think Boba has not been named in any lawsuits that I'm aware of.
Well, it is. I mean, in terms of like sugar being addictive and like these drinks being sort of, one of the things that a lot of these people talked about in this article is sort of like, oh, but it's like this fun thing. It's like my treat, my $9 treat is this really extremely specific order that I get from Starbucks every day. And part of me gets that. I mean, I can't like handle sugar in any drink anymore. Like it just gives me a headache. So luckily, like I'm out of this category entirely. But like in again on a hot summer's day, like buying an iced tea with copious amounts of ice does feel like a treat. And so I can see that it's like there's a little bit of it's a comfort drink situation, that maybe what we need is human companionship and a hug instead of that drink. Maybe that's what we need. you know but for now, I guess it's like a caramel macchiato with an extra shot of cinnamon and caramel foam on the top. All right, folks, let me know if you have a crazy order. I do want to know what it is, and I'm no judgment except for extreme judgment. I think it's terrible. But tell me, because I'm curious. All right. The other topic I wanted to discuss today was about your book series. Now, you guys wrote a graphic novel. It's called 1/6, and it explores the question of what if the insurrection had succeeded. I have a copy in my home. It's beautifully illustrated. It's so fascinating. It's funny. It's insightful. It's scary. It's titillating. It's all of those things. And so I wanted to ask you guys, I mean, why this topic? What brought you to doing this? Gon?
Don, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, we started this in the wake of the insurrection, and Alan came to me with this idea that I could not refuse. in terms of collaborating with him on making it real, which is, what would have happened had the insurrection succeeded. And that's, might sound at the time, it might sound like a fanciful science fiction dystopian thriller, but as we've seen in these last few years, that this is not just a dystopian alternative reality. This could be this could be very much our future. And so we've seen creating a dystopian story like this very much as a warning. This is the world, by spelling it out, as you'll see in the graphic novel, of what could happen. This is the kind of world that we have to be working to avoid, because it really is. It is nightmarish. If you see, the insurrection on January 6th came very close to actually changing, delaying the election results, possibly changing them and keeping Trump in power. And we sort of spell that out, how that could have happened in the comic book. But we'd be living in a very different world right now. And so we felt that there needed to be yet another red flag being waved, another warning flare being sent up, but also to talk about what are the things we can do about it. What does resistance and hope look like, under these circumstances? But the bottom line is that the insurrection on January 6th never ended. Trump is running for office again. The MAGA movement is very strong. They are still denying the outcome of the election, even though Trump has admitted in multiple ways that he knows that he lost. And so that is an ongoing threat to democracy and the rights and safety of many people in this country. And we felt that a graphic novel would be a great way to tell that story, because go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, one of the nice things about a graphic novel is that it actually does appeal to young men, right? More that's the largest demographic of people who consume graphic novels. And so I thought that was kind of sneakily smart. But also, Alan, you told me a story about I don't remember, were you at a convention of comic book convention or something, there to talk about the book, and you met someone who was at the insurrection. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, it was Baltimore Comic-Con, and I was there with copies of the comic book series, and a guy came up to me in his 40s, I would say, with his son. His son was dressed as Darth Vader, which should have been a clue, maybe. And he said, "I love this series. How did you come up with the idea? Were you there?" And I said, "No, I wasn't there, but I've talked to a bunch of people, and we've interviewed journalists." He said, "Oh, I was there." I said, "Really? What were you doing there?" He said, "Well, President Trump told us to come, so I came. I came on a bus down from Maryland." And so, Negin, I'm looking now for the exits, right, just in case.
Right.
Didn't know what was going to happen next. And so he said he got to the ellipse, and President Trump told them to go to the Capitol. He went to the Capitol. And then he takes out his phone and starts showing me photos of himself at the Capitol on January 6th with mayhem behind him. And he kept saying, I usually don't tell people this. And I'm thinking, we just met. But, he said that people started breaking in. He was going to do the same. And then a woman who had come down on the bus with him said, "You know what? You've got a kid at home. I've got kids at home. I don't think we should go in." And so according to him, he didn't go in, but a bunch of the people he was with did. Subsequently were prosecuted. He said he was looking over his shoulder for a year, worrying about the FBI breaking down his door. But we talked for a long time, 15, 20 minutes. He bought a copy of issue number 1 and he left. And I thought, hope he doesn't read this thing before I get out of here, because he may not fully understand what it's about. And then he came back 10 minutes later.
Oh, God.
And he said, "Can you sign this?" And I signed it, and he was off, and to me, that's why we're doing a comic book, because under what other circumstances would I have a 15-minute conversation with an insurrectionist? We talked about QAnon. We talked about, the media. I don't know if I persuaded him. I think he's questioning whether he did the right thing. But, we persuaded each other of our shared humanity, which was crucial and probably could not have happened through any other medium.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that's like really quite beautiful about that story. And also both of your willingness to talk, um, without knowing the full scope of what either of you thought about this thing, right? And I also think it's really telling that he had a moment of pause thinking that he had kids at home, which kind of goes to show that they knew, people there knew the illegality of like what they were doing. If there were enough people that paused to think of, oh, I have children at home, maybe I shouldn't end up in prison. That's like that's just a really telling moment. It's just a fascinating um connection that you had. Gon, what else can we expect in the series? Is the series all just like playing it out into the future?
It is, but as again, it's sort of a parallel to many current events. It is meant as a form, as an action-packed form of entertainment. So read it for fun as well as for the message. But there's the characters in the book really represent a broad spectrum of Americans and how we've not just experienced January 6th, but are experiencing this moment in our history, this very critical crossroads that we are in. There's even a MAGA character in the book who we try and portray with a great amount of empathy, as to how someone's worldview might have led them to those beliefs in a sincere way and gotten them mixed up in things that maybe they weren't expecting, but how they themselves are trying to figure their way forward and how us together as a country are trying to do that. But it's very much about not the future, not the past, but the moment that we are in, that we are, again, in this crossroads where we will decide what future we have. And that's not just at this election. Keep in mind that even if, Trump loses, that is just the first hurdle that will need to be crossed to protect democracy. It will be challenged most likely in a similar way as it was before. And then the movement that gave rise to it is still there. We're going to see, Trump faces prison term. He's not going to go quietly. And, there is a, very consistent effort to rile up the base, to incite people to violence. And so there's an ongoing challenge that we have in this country about protecting democracy and also reconnecting with fundamental values of, that there's should be democratic spaces free of that kind of conflict and violence and intimidation, which we can hash these things out as a society. And at the same time, invite people in who've felt incredibly alienated by our economic and political systems. We are looking at a massive crisis of people who feel that the system is not working for them. So no matter who wins the election, even if it's Harris and Waltz, it's, just the beginning of a process of making sure that everyone feels that they have a stake in this collective project we call our country, because, we know that the people in power are looking out for them as well. And the Democrats have a lot of work to do there as well. So, it's, we're hoping that we can help push society in the future towards a more positive direction with this comic book. And we invite everyone to check it out. 16comicsstore.com. You can find us online on Instagram. And we do try and make the book available to teachers and nonprofits and people who really are trying to provoke this conversation in their own community.
Folks, like, absolutely get this comic book. And I mean, listeners know I'm a big fan of merging comedy with like a message, merging comedy with like some sort of get out the vote type, inspiring people to do something that's as simple as voting. And I'm gonna hazard a guess that we don't have any insurrectionists that listen to this show. But you might just have some people in your family. You buy this comic book, you give this comic book as a gift, and it's just a little reminder that's also a propulsive and fun read. So it's kind of like it's like you're giving a little gift that's fun, and then they're also like, oh yeah, I should vote. So like I highly, highly recommend. Like I said, it's an extremely fun read while trying to do something very, very important. All right. And that, my friends, is the end of the show. What a fantastic conversation I had with you guys. I knew it would be. And I'm so glad you were able to do the show. And I want people to be able to follow you and all of the wonderful things that you do. Alan, where do they do that?
So we're at 16 Comics, ONESIX Comics, on Instagram and X and Threads and all the things. We're on Facebook. Also, 16comicsstore.com, all spelled out, is a place you can buy our series, and also on Amazon. And, you know, I'm on Instagram, but it's mostly my gardening. So very boring. So I would say focus on 16 Comics.
Gon, where do they find you?
You can find me at Gon Golan, Gangolan. But again, I point people to the direction of my work, not my life. So go check us out at 16comicsstore.com. And if you're interested in climate work, check out the climateclock.world. That is where my alter ego spends too much of his time.
Guys, I cannot recommend following both of these guys. And you know what? Even Alan's gardening. I cannot recommend it highly enough. But this comic book is really, really fantastic. Like I said, it's a really propulsive read, and you will enjoy it. And if you don't enjoy it, there is a young 18 to 34-year-old man in your life who will enjoy it. So please buy it for them and remind them to get out and vote. It's a fun way of doing that. And as for me, you know where to find me and all of the things. But I just wanted to let listeners know that I am going to be, I'm putting on a Muslims Are Coming presents the Swing State Invasion. We're going to be in Reading, Pennsylvania. It's going to be on October 18th. It's me. It's Gibran Salim holding it down for the Muslims with our non-Muslim friends, Josh Gondelman and Jordan Carlos. And it's a fantastic lineup. If you don't know these comics, you will absolutely, I promise you, love them. And it's going to be a fun show. And here's the kicker. It is absolutely butt free. Yeah. So come to this show. You really have no excuse, no barriers to entry. We want you to have a good time and convene with a couple of Muslims and their friends. And so you can go to NeginFarsad.com and look at the events page to find all of the information. You do need to sort of like RSVP, but like I said, it is free. But there's an Eventbrite that you need to do your business on. Otherwise, I'm also going to be speaking at the TED convention in Atlanta in October. So if you happen to be going to TED, let me know. I will be speaking there. And otherwise, I want to thank everyone who makes the show a possibility. That's our wonderful producer, Andrew McGuire. Thanks to everyone at HeadGum for making the show a possibility. Thanks to Gaby Alter for our theme music. If you have any questions or concerns, you can email us at fakethenation@gmail.com. Don't forget to support the show at patreon.com/NeginFarsad. Get your t-shirts at NeginFarsad.com. And otherwise, we'll be back in your earballs next week.
That was a HeadGum podcast.